When a homeless-looking man collapsed outside her restaurant, waitress Maria Santos had a choice: ignore him like everyone else or risk her job to help a stranger. She chose kindness. What she didn't know was that this homeless man was worth $3.2 billion, and her simple act of compassion would uncover a web of deception that would either destroy them both or lead to the most unexpected love story of the year. But in Lagos, where survival demands street smarts and authenticity is rare, can love built on lies ever become real? The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Chen Industries penthouse, 37 floors above Victoria Island. Alexander Chen stood motionless, his reflection ghosted against the Lagos skyline, watching millions of people he'd never truly known live lives he'd never truly understood. At 30, Alexander possessed everything the world said should make a man happy. His tech empire spanned 3 continents. Forbes had called him Africa's digital revolutionary. His face graced billboards from Lagos to Johannesburg. Women competed for his attention at charity galas. Business rivals feared his name. Yet as he stared at his mother's photograph on the mahogany desk, Isabella Chen, the woman who'd raised him to see humanity in everyone, he felt emptier than the concrete shells of unfinished buildings dotting the horizon. 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. That's how long it had been since she died in his arms at Lagos University Teaching Hospital, her final words still echoing in the hollow chambers of his success. "Alex, my precious boy," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic beeping of machines that couldn't save her. "I've watched you build an empire, but I've also watched you build walls. Promise me something." He'd leaned closer, his 6'2" frame folding awkwardly beside her hospital bed. "Anything, Mom. Find someone who loves your heart, not your wallet. Someone who would choose you if you were just Alex from IKEA, not Alexander Chen from the Penthouse. Promise me you'll know what real love feels like before it's too late." "I promise," he'd said, not knowing those would be the last words they'd ever share. Now, 3 months later, that promise haunted every interaction, every smile that seemed too eager, every woman who knew his net worth before his middle name. How could he find authentic love when authenticity itself felt like a foreign language? His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Chen, your 3 p.m. appointment with Senator Williams is here." Another handshake, another deal. Another step further from the man his mother had hoped he'd become. "Cancel it," Alexander said quietly. "Cancel everything for the next month." "Sir?" "I said cancel everything, Adebayo. Tell them I'm traveling. Tell them I'm sick. I don't care. I need to find something I've lost." As thunder rolled across Lagos, Alexander made a decision that would change 2 lives forever. What if he could strip away everything that made him Alexander Chen and discover who he really was underneath? What if he could become invisible, just another face in the crowd of 20 million people? What if he could find love that wasn't for sale? Meanwhile, in Ikeja, Maria Santos woke at 4:47 a.m. to the sound of her 7-year-old daughter coughing. The 1-bedroom apartment they shared with her father was small enough that every sound carried, every worry multiplied. "Lucy, baby," Maria whispered, padding barefoot across the cold concrete floor. "You okay?" Lucy's fever had broken during the night, but her cough lingered, a reminder that even small illnesses were luxuries they couldn't afford. Maria pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, relieved to find it cool. At 28, Maria had learned to calculate everything in survival terms. The rent was due in 12 days. Lucy needed new school shoes. Papa Santos's heart medication cost 8,000 naira per bottle, and his prescription was running low. She dressed quietly in the pre-dawn darkness. Her least-worn jeans, a faded yellow blouse that had once been bright, canvas shoes that were clean, if not whole. By 5:15 a.m., she was walking through the still-dark streets of Ikeja, joining the early stream of Lagos's working class, beginning another day of hustle. Mama Ngozi's diner sat on a busy corner where 3 neighborhoods met. The small restaurant served honest food to honest people: rice and beans, jollof rice with chicken, peppered fish, cold drinks that actually stayed cold. Nothing fancy, but everything made with care. "Morning, Maria," called Kemi, the cook, as she arrived. "You're early today." Couldn't sleep, Maria replied, tying her apron behind her back. The truth was, she'd been lying awake calculating and recalculating their finances, trying to find money that wasn't there. Her husband, David, had been gone for 3 years now. One day he was there, playing with Lucy, promising to help with Papa Santos's medical bills. The next morning, Maria woke to find his clothes gone, their joint savings account emptied, and a note that said simply, "I can't do this anymore. Take care of yourself." She'd burned the note that same day, but the words had branded themselves onto her heart. Since then, Maria had worked 2 jobs. Waitressing at the diner from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., then cleaning offices in Victoria Island from 4 p.m. until sometimes midnight. It was barely enough, but barely enough was still enough. What kept her going wasn't just responsibility, it was hope. Hope that Lucy would have opportunities Maria never had. Hope that Papa Santos would see his granddaughter graduate. Hope that kindness, which cost nothing but meant everything, would somehow be rewarded. "You know what I love about you, Maria," Mama Ngozi had said one day, watching her slip a free meat pie to a street child. "You give from your heart, not your pocket. That's rare in this world." Maria had smiled, not mentioning that sometimes her heart was all she had left to give. As she prepared for another day of serving others, she had no idea that her philosophy of kindness was about to be tested by a man who had everything except the one thing that mattered most. Alexander's transformation took place in the pre-dawn hours of a Thursday morning, in the bathroom of a rented room in Ikea that cost 15,000 naira per month, less than he typically spent on a single meal. He'd spent the previous week crafting his new identity with the same methodical precision he applied to billion-dollar acquisitions. Alex Okafor, 32 years old, unemployed, living day to day. He'd practiced the story until it felt almost real. Lost his job at a small tech company, burned through his savings, too proud to go home to his village in Anambra. Standing before a cracked mirror, Alexander barely recognized himself. His usually perfectly groomed hair was deliberately unkempt. His manicured hands were dirty. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by items from Balogun Market that had seen better years. Torn jeans held together by stubbornness, a faded Adidas t-shirt, scuffed sneakers that had walked many miles in other men's lives. But the most significant change wasn't visible. For the first time in decades, Alexander Chen didn't exist. There was no empire to run, no board meetings to attend, no assistant managing his schedule. He was just Alex, a man with 5,000 naira in his pocket and nowhere important to be. The first week was harder than he'd anticipated. Real hunger was different from the strategic fasting he'd occasionally tried for health reasons. Real cold was different from the air conditioning he could control with a remote. Real helplessness was different from any challenge his wealth had ever presented. By day 7, as he walked the streets of Ikeja looking for work that didn't exist, Alexander began to understand something his business education had never taught him. Poverty wasn't just about lacking money, it was about lacking choices. That's how he found himself outside Mama Ngozi's diner on a Tuesday afternoon, his stomach empty and his pride somewhere around his ankles. Through the window, he watched the lunch crowd, construction workers, market traders, office clerks, all people whose faces told stories of daily struggle and small victories. And moving between them with grace and purpose was a young woman who seemed to carry light in her movements. Maria Santos was in her element during the lunch rush. She balanced 3 plates on one arm while carrying drinks in the other, remembered that Mr. Adeolu liked extra pepper on his rice, knew that Mrs. Taiwo was saving money for her daughter's wedding. To outsiders, she was just another waitress. To her customers, she was the bright spot in their day. Alexander watched her for an hour, fascinated. In his world, service came with a price tag and a smile that disappeared when the payment was processed. Here, Maria's care seemed genuine. She celebrated when regular customers shared good news, showed concern when they looked tired. When the crowd thinned, Maria stepped outside for a brief break, pulling a small bottle of water from her apron pocket and taking measured sips. That's when she noticed him. He was sitting on the concrete step beside the diner, head in his hands, trying to look invisible. But there was something about the way he held himself, straight-backed despite his apparent defeat, that caught her attention. "Excuse me," she said softly, approaching the way one might approach a wounded animal. "Are you all right?" Alexander looked up, startled. Up close, Maria's eyes held depth that magazines couldn't capture. Kindness, yes, but also strength and intelligence. "I'm fine," he said automatically, then caught himself. Alex wouldn't be fine. Alex would be struggling. Just tired. Maria studied his face with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen many forms of hardship. She recognized hunger, recognized pride, recognized the particular exhaustion that came from fighting battles others couldn't see. "When did you last eat?" she asked directly. Alex hesitated. "Yesterday, I think." It was true, though yesterday for him had involved a catered board meeting he'd attended via video call from his fake apartment. Without another word, Maria disappeared into the diner. Alexander sat there, unsure what to do, feeling like a fraud for accepting sympathy from someone who probably needed it more than he did. When she returned, she carried a covered plate and a bottle of Coke, still cold from the refrigerator. "Here," she said, settling beside him on the step. "Mama Ngozi always makes extra rice. It would just go to waste." They both knew it was a lie. In a place like this, nothing went to waste. Alexander stared at the plate, overwhelmed by an emotion he couldn't name. "I can't pay for this." "Did I ask you to?" Maria's voice was gentle but firm. "Sometimes we all need help. Today you need food. Tomorrow maybe I'll need something you can give. That's how community works." As Alex, uncovered the plate to reveal jollof rice with chicken, fried plantain, and a small portion of coleslaw, he felt something crack inside his chest. When was the last time someone had given him something without wanting anything in return? "What's your name?" Maria asked as he began to eat. "Alex," he said, the shortened version of his name feeling strange on his tongue. "I'm Maria. I work here most days, if you're ever in the area and, well, if we have extra food." For the next hour, they talked. Maria told him about Lucy, about her dreams of opening a bakery, about how she believed that kindness was the only currency that grew when you spent it. Alexander found himself sharing carefully crafted stories about his fictional life, but as he listened to Maria's genuine warmth, the lies felt heavier with each word. When Maria had to return to work, Alexander sat on that step for another hour, still holding the empty plate. For the first time since his mother's death, he felt connected to another human being. He also felt like the worst kind of imposter. Over the following 3 weeks, Alexander's experiment evolved into something he hadn't expected. A double life that was slowly teaching him who he really was. By day, he was Alex Okafor, the unemployed tech worker who occasionally helped out at construction sites for daily wages. He'd learned to mix cement, carry blocks, and navigate the complex social dynamics of men who worked with their hands and lived by codes his MBA had never covered. By night, he managed his empire from his sparse apartment, conducting video calls with his face strategically obscured, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of customers. His assistant, Adebayo, thought he was working remotely from Dubai. His board thought he was exploring expansion opportunities in the Middle East. The contradiction was exhausting, but it was also illuminating. As Alex, he discovered muscles he'd forgotten he had. He learned the satisfaction of physical labor, the camaraderie of shared struggle. He also learned about the weight of uncertainty, never knowing if tomorrow would bring work, money, or another day of hunger. More importantly, he learned about Maria. She became the fixed point around which his days revolved. Every lunch break, he'd find himself outside Mama Ngozi's diner, hoping she'd have a few minutes to talk. Sometimes she brought him food. Sometimes they just sat together in companionable silence. Maria told him about her childhood in a small town in Ogun State, where her father had been a respected schoolteacher before his heart condition forced early retirement. She spoke about her marriage to David, how young love had crumbled under the pressure of adult responsibilities. "I used to blame him for leaving," she confided one afternoon as they sat watching Lagos traffic flow past. "But now I think maybe he was just honest about his limits. Some people aren't built for the long fight." "And you are?" Alexander asked. Maria smiled, but it was tired around the edges. "I have to be. Lucy depends on me. Papa depends on me. And honestly, I depend on me too. If I give up, who's going to believe in the bakery dream?" Alexander found himself sharing stories too, carefully edited versions of his real experiences, disguised as fiction. He talked about growing up privileged but feeling isolated, about the pressure to succeed, about wondering if anyone would care about him if he wasn't achieving. "You know what I think?" Maria said after one such conversation. "I think you're harder on yourself than anyone else would be. You talk like you have to earn the right to exist." Her words hit closer to truth than she could have known. The first real test of Alexander's deception came during week 4 when Maria's world began to crumble. It started with a phone call at 2 a.m. Alexander was in his apartment reviewing quarterly reports when his phone buzzed with Maria's number. The number she'd finally given him after weeks of tentative friendship. "Alex?" Her voice was shaking. "I'm sorry to call so late, but what's wrong?" "It's Papa. He collapsed. We're at the hospital, and the doctors, they say his heart is failing. He needs surgery immediately." Alexander was already reaching for his car keys. "Which hospital?" "Lagos University Teaching Hospital. But Alex, you don't have to." "I'm coming." The drive to Luth felt surreal. Alexander navigating his Mercedes through empty streets at 2:30 a.m., rushing to comfort a woman who thought he was unemployed, to help in a crisis that his real identity could solve with a phone call. He found Maria in the waiting area, still in her work uniform. Lucy asleep in her lap, both of them looking small and vulnerable under the harsh fluorescent lights. "How bad is it?" he asked, settling beside them. Maria's eyes were red but determined. "They say he needs a cardiac bypass. His arteries are almost completely blocked. Without surgery—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. "What did the doctors say about timing?" "Within the next 48 hours, if possible." "But Alex," Maria's voice dropped to a whisper, "the surgery costs 15 million naira. Insurance only covers 2 million. I have 3 million in savings, but—" Alexander felt his heart constrict. 15 million naira was nothing to him, less than he'd spent on art for his office. But to Maria, it was an impossible mountain. "There has to be something we can do," he said. "Payment plans, charity programs. I've asked about everything." Maria's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. "The hospital needs payment guarantees before they'll schedule surgery, and charity applications take weeks to process." Alexander watched her, this woman who gave free food to strangers, who worked 2 jobs to support her family, who believed in kindness as a force that could change the world, facing a problem that all her goodness couldn't solve. In that moment, sitting in that sterile hospital waiting room, Alexander made a decision that would complicate everything. "I'll figure something out," he said quietly. Maria looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Alex, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering. 24 hours later, Maria received a call from the hospital's billing department. A charitable foundation called the Isabella Memorial Fund had reviewed Papa Santos's case and approved full coverage for his surgery, based on the family's demonstrated commitment to community service. Maria collapsed into tears of relief and joy, throwing her arms around Alex when she found him at the diner that evening. "It's a miracle," she sobbed against his shoulder. "Someone out there saw our struggle and decided to help. I can't believe there are still people like that in the world." Alexander held her, knowing he was living the worst kind of lie, one that masqueraded as goodness while building itself on deception. But Papa Santos was alive. The surgery was successful, and as Alexander watched Lucy color pictures for her grandfather during visiting hours, he told himself that sometimes lies served truth in ways that honesty couldn't. He was wrong, but he wouldn't realize it for several more weeks. The Isabella Memorial Fund, named for his mother and established through a web of shell companies and legal maneuvering, became Alexander's way of reconciling his growing guilt with his continued deception. If he was going to lie to Maria about who he was, at least he could secretly help other families facing similar crises. Within a month, the fund had quietly covered medical bills for 17 families, provided small business loans to 12 entrepreneurs, and sponsored educational expenses for 23 students. Alexander told himself he was honoring his mother's memory while protecting the one relationship that felt real. But secrets, like shadows, grow longer as the sun sets. The first crack in his carefully constructed facade came during week 7, on a sweltering Thursday afternoon when Alexander was helping renovate a small classroom at Lucy's school. He'd volunteered, as Alex, the unemployed tech worker with time to spare, to assist with their computer lab upgrade. Uncle Alex, Lucy called out as he was installing software on donated computers. Can you help me with my homework? The 7-year-old had taken to calling him uncle, a title that filled Alexander with pride and guilt in equal measure. Lucy's homework was a school project about successful Africans, and she'd chosen to write about technology entrepreneurs. Look, Lucy said, spreading a collection of printed articles across the desk. I'm writing about this man who started a big computer company in Nigeria. Mama says if you work hard and believe in yourself, you can become anything. Alexander's blood froze. Staring up at him from the papers was his own face, a professional headshot from a Forbes interview conducted 6 months earlier. The headline read, Alexander Chen, How a Lagos-born visionary built Africa's largest tech empire. He looks like you, doesn't he? Lucy said innocently. Same nose, same eyes. Maybe you're related. Alexander managed a weak smile. Lots of people look alike, Lucy. That's just coincidence. But coincidences have a way of accumulating into inevitabilities. The second crack came 2 weeks later when Maria's phone mysteriously reappeared. She'd lost it on a bus 3 weeks after their first meeting, a devastating blow for someone who relied on it for coordinating her 2 jobs and staying connected to Lucy's school. Alexander had wanted to replace it immediately, but Alex couldn't afford such generosity without raising suspicions. Instead, he'd orchestrated an elaborate scenario involving the bus company's lost and found department, a good Samaritan who'd turned in the phone, and a miraculous series of events that returned the device to Maria with all her contacts intact. I can't believe it, Maria had said, clutching the phone like a lifeline. 3 weeks missing, and someone just turned it in. Maybe Papa was right when he said angels walk among us. Alexander smiled and nodded, adding another thread to the web of deceptions that was becoming harder to maintain. The third crack was the most dangerous of all. It came in the form of Vincent Adebayo, Alexander's assistant, who appeared at Mama Ngozi's diner on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in search of his missing boss. Alexander was sitting with Maria during her break, sharing a plate of rice and discussing Lucy's upcoming school play, when he noticed a familiar figure in an expensive suit standing near the entrance, scanning the crowd. I'll be right back, Alexander told Maria, his heart hammering as he quickly moved toward the back of the restaurant. But it was too late. Vincent's eyes had found him. Mr. Chen, Vincent called out, his voice carrying across the small dining room. Sir, what are you doing here? Every conversation in the diner stopped. Maria's head turned toward the sound, her eyes finding Alexander's face just as Vincent approached, with obvious relief and professional concern. Sir, we've been looking everywhere for you. The board meeting with the South African investors is in 3 hours, and Vincent. Alexander's voice was sharp, desperate. Not here. Not now. But Vincent was already pulling out his phone, clearly agitated. Sir, with respect, you've been missing for 7 weeks. The Singapore deal is falling apart. The government contract needs your signature and... I said not here. The sharpness of Alexander's voice cut through the diner like a blade. Everyone was staring now, including Maria, whose face was cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that looked like dawning horror. Vincent finally seemed to register the attention they'd drawn. He looked around the modest restaurant, at Alexander's shabby clothes, at the woman sitting frozen at their table. Sir, he said quietly, is everything all right? Alexander looked across the room at Maria, who was slowly standing up, her face pale but her eyes bright with understanding. In her hands was Lucy's homework assignment, the one with his photograph, the one she'd been reviewing during their conversation. Time slowed to a crawl as Alexander watched Maria's world shift on its axis. Her eyes moved from the newspaper photo to his face, from Vincent's expensive suit to the deference in his voice when he called Alexander, Sir. Alex, she said, and her voice sounded like glass breaking. Vincent, finally understanding the gravity of the situation, began backing toward the door. Sir, perhaps we should discuss this at the office. No. Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. Maria, please, let me explain. But Maria was already gathering her things, her movements sharp and mechanical. She folded Lucy's homework with trembling hands, picked up her purse, and looked at Alexander with eyes that held 7 weeks of shared lunches, quiet conversations, and growing trust. My name is Maria Santos, she said to Vincent, her voice steady despite the tears beginning to form. I'm the waitress who's been feeding your boss for the past 2 months. I thought he was homeless. Vincent's face went white as understanding dawned. Maria turned back to Alexander, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of every kindness she'd shown, every confidence she'd shared, every moment of authentic connection they'd built. "Tell me one thing that was true," she said. "Just one thing, Alex, or Alexander, or whoever you really are." Alexander opened his mouth, but no words came, because the truth was that everything had been true except the most important thing of all, who he was. Maria nodded as if his silence confirmed what she already knew. She walked past Vincent, past the staring customers, past Alexander, and out into the Lagos afternoon rain. Alexander stood in the middle of Mama Ngozi's diner, surrounded by the wreckage of his experiment, finally understanding the difference between being alone by choice and being alone because you'd destroyed the only thing that mattered. Vincent cleared his throat carefully. "Sir, should we schedule the board meeting?" Alexander said quietly. "I'll be there in an hour." As he walked toward the door, leaving behind 7 weeks of the most honest dishonesty he'd ever lived, Alexander caught sight of his reflection in the diner's window. For the first time in 2 months, he looked exactly like what he was. A very wealthy, very powerful, very successful man who had just lost the only thing money couldn't buy. The executive boardroom of Chen Industries occupied the entire 40th floor of the company's Victoria Island headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lagos, from the gleaming towers of Ikoyi to the crowded markets of Lagos Island, from the affluent neighborhoods where billionaires lived to the dense communities where people like Maria fought daily battles just to survive. Alexander sat at the head of the polished conference table, wearing a perfectly tailored Armani suit that felt like armor against the world. Across from him, 12 board members waited for an explanation of his 7-week disappearance. Charts and graphs filled the wall screens, showing the slight dips in productivity and decision-making that had occurred in his absence. "Gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire, "I apologize for my absence. Personal matters required my immediate attention." The questions came quickly. The Singapore expansion deal needed final approval. The government contract required his signature. 3 competitor companies had made acquisition offers that demanded immediate responses. Alexander answered each query with mechanical precision, his mind executing at full capacity, while his heart remained somewhere in a small diner in Ikeja, watching a woman's world collapse because of his selfishness. By 6 p.m., business was concluded. Deals were signed, strategies approved, crises averted. Chen Industries would continue its relentless growth, Alexander's net worth would increase by another few million, and the financial press would continue celebrating his visionary leadership. He felt emptier than he had in his entire life. That evening, Alexander stood in his penthouse apartment, staring at his mother's photograph. The luxury that surrounded him, hand-carved Italian furniture, original artwork worth more than most people's houses, a wine collection that could fund a small charity, felt like set pieces in a play he no longer wanted to perform. His phone buzzed constantly. Investors seeking meetings, society pages requesting interviews. Women who'd heard about his mysterious disappearance and wanted to comfort him back into their social circles. He ignored them all. Instead, he found himself thinking about the weight of cement blocks on his shoulders, the satisfaction of earning 3,000 naira for a day's honest work, the taste of jollof rice shared with someone who cared about his well-being rather than his bank balance. Most of all, he thought about Maria's face in those final moments, the betrayal, the hurt, but also something else. Disappointment, not just in his deception, but in his inability to trust her with the truth. For 3 days, Alexander tried to return to his old life. He attended charity galas where people praised his generosity while calculating how much they could ask him to donate. He sat through business dinners where conversations revolved around deals and acquisitions and the endless pursuit of more. He woke up in a bed that cost more than Maria made in 6 months, surrounded by luxury that felt increasingly meaningless. On the 4th day, he made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to his lawyer. "I want to establish a trust fund," Alexander said. 80% of my Chen Industries shares, all my real estate holdings except the Penthouse, and 2.8 billion naira in liquid assets. Sir? His lawyer's voice carried careful concern. That's nearly your entire fortune. May I ask the purpose of this trust? The Isabella Memorial Foundation will provide microloans, medical assistance, and educational support to working families in Lagos. People who are fighting every day but just need a chance. And the oversight? Alexander paused, thinking of a woman who worked 2 jobs and still found the energy to dream about opening a bakery. I'll send you the details of who should manage it. The second call was to Vincent. Cancel everything on my schedule for the next month, Alexander said. Sir, you just came back from... Cancel it all. And Vincent, start a search for my replacement as CEO. Someone younger, someone hungrier. Someone who still believes building an empire is worth sacrificing their humanity. Mr. Chen, if I may ask, what's brought on this? I'm not sure I know how to be a person anymore, Vincent. And I think it's time I learned. Meanwhile, Maria's world had also come to a complete stop. For 3 days after the confrontation at the diner, she'd called in sick to both jobs, something she'd never done even when fever had left her unable to stand. Lucy stayed with her neighbor, Mrs. Adamu, while Maria sat in her small apartment, trying to reconcile 7 weeks of memories with the crushing reality of Alexander's deception. The worst part wasn't the lies, though those cut deep. The worst part was how real everything had felt. His interest in her dreams, his gentleness with Lucy, his respect for Papa Santos, all of it had seemed genuine. Had it all been performance? Mama, Lucy said on the 4th morning, climbing into bed beside her, why are you so sad? Maria wrapped her arms around her daughter, breathing in the smell of the cheap shampoo they used, grounding herself in this small piece of truth in a world that had become unsteady. Sometimes people aren't who they pretend to be, baby. Like Uncle Alex. Maria's heart clenched. How did you know? I heard you crying and talking to Grandpa Papa about it. Lucy's 7-year-old wisdom was sometimes startling. You said Uncle Alex was really the rich man from my homework. Yes, baby, he was. Lucy was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the seriousness children brought to important matters. But Mama, she finally said, he was still nice to us, right? He still played games with me and helped Grandpa Papa feel better and made you smile. Yes, but... And he never asked for anything back, even when he was pretending to be poor. Maria paused. It was true. In all their time together, Alexander had never asked for anything. No favors, no money, no special treatment. He'd accepted her kindness and offered his own in return. Lucy, it's more complicated than... Mama, you always tell me that what matters is what's in someone's heart, not what's in their pocket. So if Uncle Alex's heart was good to us, does it matter that his pockets were full? From the mouth of babes. That afternoon, Maria made her own decision. She put on her best dress, a simple blue sundress she'd bought for Papa Santos's birthday last year, and took a bus to Victoria Island. Chen Industries Tower was everything she'd expected and nothing she was prepared for. The marble lobby, the security guards in expensive uniforms, the elevator that climbed smoothly toward heights that made her ears pop. The receptionist on the 40th floor was polite but firm. Mr. Chen isn't seeing anyone today. If you'd like to make an appointment, tell him Maria Santos is here, Maria said quietly. He'll know who I am. 20 minutes later, she was being escorted through glass corridors toward an office that occupied more space than her entire apartment building. Alexander stood when she entered, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the expanse of his success. He was wearing another perfectly tailored suit, his hair styled with expensive products, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that made him Alexander Chen instead of Alex Okafor. But his eyes looked as broken as she felt. Maria, he said, and her name sounded different in this space. I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again. I wasn't sure I did, she said honestly. But I needed to understand something. Alexander gestured toward the seating area by the windows, and they sat across from each other on furniture that probably cost more than she made in a year. When you were pretending to be Alex, Maria said, were you also pretending to care about me? The question hung between them like a bridge that could either connect them or burn, depending on his answer. No, Alexander said immediately. Never. Everything I felt for you, everything we shared, That was the most real thing in my life. But how do I know the difference? Maria's voice was steady, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. How do I know which parts were Alex and which parts were Alexander? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the Lagos skyline. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Can I show you something? He walked to his desk and returned with a thick folder of documents. These are the legal papers transferring 80% of my company to a charitable trust. For families like yours. Single mothers, struggling workers, people who know the real value of a naira because they've had to fight for everyone. Maria stared at the papers, not quite comprehending. Alexander, what are you doing? Becoming the man you made me want to be. He looked directly into her eyes. You were right about everything, Maria. I was so afraid of someone loving me for my money that I never gave you the chance to love me despite it. I took away your choice, and that was unforgivable. You don't have to give up everything. Yes, I do. His voice was firm, because for the first time in my life, I understand what my mother meant. The man you knew as Alex, that's who I really am when I'm not hiding behind wealth and power. That's who I want to be. Maria felt tears beginning to form. And what about your company? Your life's work? I'm stepping down as CEO. I'll keep enough shares to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. I want to work with my hands again. I want to earn my rest at the end of the day. I want to live a life that matters instead of a life that just accumulates. Alexander. I'd rather be genuinely middle class with you than fake rich without you, he said, but I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not asking for forgiveness I don't deserve. I just wanted you to know that you changed me, the real me. And I wanted to make sure this foundation exists to help people like you, people who deserve chances they're not getting. Maria looked at this man, this billionaire who was giving away his fortune, this accomplished CEO who was walking away from power, this person who had lied to her about everything except the thing that mattered most. His heart. There's something you need to understand, she said quietly. Alexander nodded, prepared for her to reject everything he'd offered. Lucy asked me something yesterday. She wanted to know if it mattered that your pockets were full when your heart was good to us. Alexander's breath caught. I've been thinking about that question, Maria continued, and I realized something. You didn't lie to test me, Alexander. You lied to test yourself. You needed to know if someone could love Alex before you could believe anyone could love Alexander. Maria. But here's what you didn't understand. I did love Alex. And if you'd trusted me enough to tell me the truth, if you'd said, Maria, I'm wealthy but I'm lonely, and I want to know if you can see past that to who I really am, I would have shown you that love isn't about what you have or don't have. It's about who you choose to be with what you're given. They sat in silence for a moment, two people who had found each other across impossible odds and nearly lost everything because of fear masquerading as protection. So where does that leave us? Alexander asked. Maria smiled, the first real smile she'd worn since the day at the diner. It leaves us with a choice. We can let the lies poison what was real, or we can choose to build something true from here. And what do you choose? I choose to trust that the man who sat on concrete steps sharing rice and dreams is the same man who's giving away billions to help people he's never met. I choose to believe that Alex and Alexander are both you, and I choose both. Alexander felt something break open in his chest. Not breaking apart, but breaking free. I love you, Maria, he said. I love your strength, your kindness, your dreams. I love the way you make me want to be worthy of the second chance you're giving me. I love you too, Maria said. All of you. But Alexander. Yes? No more lies, ever, even tiny ones, even ones you think will protect me. From now on, we face everything together with the truth. I promise, Alexander said, and he meant it with every cell in his body. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lagos hummed with the energy of 20 million people pursuing their dreams, fighting their battles, loving their families. And in that moment, both Maria and Alexander understood that they were no longer observers of life. They were participants in something bigger than themselves. 6 months later, the small bakery on Adeniran Ogunsanya Street had become the heartbeat of its neighborhood. The yellow walls were covered with children's drawings and photos of happy customers. The display cases held fresh bread, meat pies, and the sweet-smelling cakes that had made Maria's reputation spread far beyond Ikeja. But more than that, Santos and Chen family bakery had become a symbol of something rare in Lagos, a place where authenticity mattered more than status, where kindness was currency, and where love had built something beautiful from the ground up. Maria stood behind the counter at 6 a.m., her hair pulled back in a colorful head wrap, flour dusting her apron, directing the morning rush with the efficiency of someone who had learned to balance dreams with practicality. Beside her, Alexander, now permanently Alex to everyone who mattered, kneaded dough with hands that had grown strong from honest work. The transition hadn't been easy. Learning to run a small business was different from managing a multinational corporation. Alexander's first attempts at customer service had been awkward. He was too formal, too removed from the rhythms of neighborhood life. But Maria had been patient, teaching him that success in a place like this was measured in relationships, not just revenue. "Morning, Mr. Alex," called out Mama Aduni, a regular customer who sold vegetables in the nearby market. "The usual, please." Alexander smiled, automatically reaching for the brown bread and butter that she ordered every morning. "Coming right up, Mama. How's your grandson's exam preparation going?" These small conversations, these moments of genuine connection, had become the unexpected joy of his new life. In his old world, interactions were calculated, strategic. Here, they were simply human. Papa Santos sat in his favorite corner, fully recovered from his surgery, and serving as the bakery's unofficial greeter and storyteller. Lucy did her homework at a nearby table, helping serve juice to her favorite customers when she wasn't studying. The Isabella Memorial Foundation, managed by a board that included Maria, had quietly revolutionized the lives of hundreds of Lagos families. Microloans had helped start dozens of small businesses. Medical assistance had saved lives. Educational scholarships had opened doors. But the foundation's proudest achievement was something that couldn't be measured in naira or counted in statistics. It had given people hope. "Alex," Maria called out during a brief lull in the morning rush, "can you help Mrs. Okafor with her loan application?" Mrs. Okafor was a widow who wanted to start a tailoring business but lacked the capital for equipment. Alexander had learned that these conversations about dreams deferred and chances needed were more meaningful than any board meeting he'd ever attended. That evening, as they walked home through the familiar streets of Ikeja, Maria and Alexander talked about the day's small victories and minor challenges. Lucy skipped ahead of them, stopping to greet neighbors and pet stray cats, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and her future was bright. "Any regrets?" Maria asked, a question that had become their evening ritual. Alexander considered this seriously, as he always did. Giving up wealth meant living more carefully, thinking about expenses that had once been automatic. They lived in a modest apartment above the bakery now, nothing like his former penthouse. His wardrobe consisted of simple clothes designed for work, not impressions. But when he looked at Maria, flour still in her hair, tiredness around her eyes that spoke of satisfying work rather than desperate struggle, he felt richer than he ever had in his air-conditioned towers. "Just one," he said, pulling her closer as they walked. "What's that? I wish I'd met you sooner. I wish I hadn't wasted so many years thinking success meant accumulating things instead of accumulating moments like this." Maria smiled, thinking of her own journey. "We met when we were supposed to meet, Alex. Any earlier, and you might not have been ready to see me. Any later, and I might not have been ready to trust you." From ahead of them, Lucy called out, "Mama, Uncle Alex, look." She was pointing at the evening sky, where the setting sun had painted the clouds in shades of gold and pink that rivaled any artwork in Alexander's former collection. "Beautiful," Maria said. "Perfect," Alexander agreed, though he was looking at her instead of the sky. As Lagos settled into evening around them, three people who had found each other across impossible odds walked toward home, a small apartment filled with the sounds of family, the smells of baking bread, and the quiet satisfaction of lives lived authentically. They weren't rich by the standards Alexander had once lived by, but they were wealthy in ways that mattered, in love freely given and received, in work that served others, in dreams that were built on truth rather than deception. The wedding was everything Maria had dreamed of, and nothing like what Alexander's old life would have demanded. Instead of a five-star hotel ballroom, they celebrated in the courtyard behind the bakery, under strings of lights that Lucy had helped hang. Instead of a guest list of business contacts and society figures, they were surrounded by neighbors, customers, construction workers, and market traders. People who had become family through shared struggles and simple kindness. Mama Ngozi, wearing her finest wrapper and jewel, served as the official wedding planner, coordinating a feast that featured the best of Lagos street food alongside Maria's signature cakes. Papa Santos, tears streaming down his face, walked Maria down the aisle, a path through the courtyard marked by rose petals that Lucy had scattered with ceremonial seriousness. Alexander stood waiting at the makeshift altar, wearing a simple white agbada that Maria had chosen for him. No expensive designer suit, no imported accessories, just clean, honest clothes for an honest man making honest promises. As Maria approached in a white dress she'd sewn herself with help from Mrs. Okafor's new tailoring business, Alexander felt his breath catch. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was real. Everything about this moment, from the children playing at the edges of the celebration to the music from a local band that played from the heart rather than for hire, was authentic in ways his old life had never managed to achieve. The ceremony was conducted by Pastor Adebayo from the neighborhood church, a man who had watched their relationship grow from suspicion through crisis to genuine partnership. His words were simple and true. "Marriage is not about finding someone to complete you," he said, looking at the couple before him and the community gathered around them. "It is about choosing, every day, to build something together that is stronger than what either of you could create alone." When the time came for vows, Alexander spoke first. "Maria, you taught me the difference between being successful and being worthy. You showed me that the greatest wealth is love freely given, and the greatest poverty is living without authentic connection. I promise to choose truth over comfort, community over isolation, and you over everything else, every day for the rest of my life." Maria's response brought tears to eyes throughout the courtyard. "Alexander, you taught me that transformation is possible for anyone brave enough to choose it. You showed me that love can cross any divide when it's built on respect and honesty. I promise to choose faith over fear, partnership over independence, and us over anything the world tries to convince us we need." Lucy, serving as the ring-bearer, presented the simple gold bands they'd chosen together. Nothing flashy, nothing designed to impress, just symbols of commitment that would grow more beautiful with wear. As they slipped the rings onto each other's fingers, Alexander whispered words only Maria could hear. "Thank you for loving the man I was becoming, not just the man I was pretending to be." Maria smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you for trusting me with all of you, Alex and Alexander and everyone you're still becoming." The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. Musicians played, children danced, neighbors shared stories about the couple who had brought love and hope to their community. The Isabella Memorial Foundation surprised the newlyweds by announcing that 3 more families had been approved for assistance, and Mrs. Okafor presented them with matching traditional outfits she'd crafted as her wedding gift. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift home, Alexander and Maria found themselves alone in their small apartment above the bakery, surrounded by wedding gifts that spoke to the life they'd built. Homemade quilts, carved wooden bowls, books of recipes, plants for their small balcony garden. "So," Maria said, settling beside him on their simple couch, still wearing her wedding dress, "how does it feel to be officially part of the Santos family?" Alexander pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her presence beside him. Through their window, Lagos hummed with its eternal energy. Millions of people pursuing dreams, building families, creating lives of meaning from whatever materials they had at hand. "It feels like coming home," he said, "not to a place, but to myself." Later that night, as they lay in bed listening to the gentle sounds of their neighborhood settling into sleep, Maria asked their traditional question, "Any regrets?" Alexander thought about the life he'd given up, the penthouse with its view of the city, the cars that cost more than most people's homes, the power to change industries with a phone call. He thought about board meetings and business dinners and the endless pursuit of more that had defined his first 30 years. Then he thought about tomorrow, waking up early to bake bread for people who would greet him by name, working beside the woman he loved to build something meaningful, going to sleep each night tired from labor that served others rather than just himself. None, he said, and meant it completely. Not a single one. Maria curled closer to him, her hand finding his across the simple cotton sheets. I love you, Alex. I love you too, Maria. All of me loves all of you. Outside their window, Lagos dreamed its massive dreams. But inside their small room above a neighborhood bakery, two people who had found each other across impossible odds slept the deep sleep of those who had chosen authenticity over artifice. Love over luxury and truth over everything else, the world had tried to convince them they needed. In the morning, they would wake up to the sound of their daughter getting ready for school, the smell of bread rising in the ovens below, and the gentle chaos of a life built on love rather than lies. They would serve their community, grow their family, and continue building something beautiful from the ground up. But for now, they simply held each other in the darkness, two people who had learned that the greatest fortune isn't what you accumulate, but what you choose to give away, and the greatest love isn't what you deserve, but what you decide to become worthy of, one honest moment at a time. In a city of 20 million people, where authenticity was rare and true love was often considered naive, they had found something priceless. Each other, exactly as they were, with all pretenses stripped away and all possibilities spread out before them, like the promise of tomorrow's fresh bread. The end. The most extraordinary love stories often begin with the simplest acts of kindness, and the richest lives are built not on what we possess, but on what we choose to share. In a world that often confuses success with worth, the greatest courage is being authentically yourself, and the greatest fortune is finding someone who loves you exactly as you are, not as you think you should be. Sometimes the most valuable thing we can give someone is not our perfection, but our truth. And sometimes the most beautiful thing we can build together is not an empire, but a home.